Welcome to Inside the MS Clinic, Navigating Your Care and the Latest in MS Research, presented by the Hotchkiss Brain Institute's MS Innovation Program at the University of Calgary. I am Tricia Lichtenberger, the manager of the MS Innovation Program. I have the joy of working with our researchers, clinicians, trainees, and students here at the University of Calgary to advance MS research and care. Welcome to Dr. Sarah Mora, who's going to be moderating this session. She is a professor at the Department of Clinical Neurosciences at the University of Calgary. She is the director of our MS Clinic and the co-director of the MS Innovation Program. She came to us from London, Ontario in 2023, where she established Canada's first cognition clinic for people living with MS. So please go ahead, Dr. Mora.
Thank you so much, Trish, and welcome everyone. It's so great to see everyone here. I'm really excited about this presentation today. I'm really happy to highlight some of the great things about this clinic, which I just joined recently. We'll have 4 separate presentations by 4 different pillars of our MS clinic. So the first thing we're going to start with today is talking about the role of the neurologist, the MS neurologist. And to speak to that topic today is Dr. Scott Jarvis. Dr. Jarvis is a born and bred Calgarian. He did his PhD before starting medical school, and he did that here in Calgary. He did his neurology residency in Calgary as well. He decided to mix it up a bit by doing half his fellowship here in Calgary and the other half at UCSF, just to see how the other world lives. And he's been working in the MS clinic here in Calgary since 2015. And he chose MS as his specialty within the world of neurology based on the people with MS who he encountered during his residency and based on the inspiration of those patients, as well as some of his great mentors, which include Dr. Luann Metz, the previous director of this clinic, Dr. Bob Bell, and Dr. Dave Patry, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. So welcome, Scott. It'll be great to hear from you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Tricia. The role of the neurologist in the clinic, I was sort of struggling to use hockey as a metaphor because I'm much happier with talking about hockey. But I guess the closest thing that I could use to describe the role of the neurologist in the clinic is kind of like the quarterback. You can see in this diagram here, with someone who has MS be at the center, and the people you're going to interact most closely with are going to be the neurologist and your nurse, and you're going to get to meet Katrina shortly. She's going to talk about the role of nurses. Around us and if you're lucky enough to be at the South Elf campus, you're familiar with Grace, who you've talked to on the phone before, who books appointments and tries to keep the neurologist in line. And then we have, in Calgary, lucky enough to have a huge multidisciplinary team, which includes therapists and other subspecialists, for example, pain specialists, bladder specialists, etc. So with your neurologist, we help coordinate the interactions of all these different members of the team. And so specifically looking at the role that the neurologist plays, step 1 is on your first visit to the clinic would be to actually diagnose multiple sclerosis. And this involves taking a detailed history because we also want to get to know you. You want to get to know us, but we need to get to know you. There's going to be a neurological examination, and you're all familiar with that. It involves an MRI and looking at cerebral spinal fluid analysis and blood work. And in the future, you're going to see more blood work analysis as well. We use other technologies like optical coherence tomography, visual evoked potentials, to help us put together, is this multiple sclerosis or is this not multiple sclerosis? And if it's not, what is it? And so we rule out some of the mimics, and you'll see that I've listed here some of the mimics. If any of you have ever Googled your symptoms, and there's a lot of different things that look like MS that aren't, but we want to make sure that we're actually dealing with multiple sclerosis. And that's job 1 of the multiple sclerosis, is figure out if it's MS or if it's not. And if it is MS, what kind of MS is it and how we're going to treat it. And then the other big role here, and there's so many things I didn't talk about. One of the biggest things I do in my very first visit, once I diagnose multiple sclerosis, is to assure you, and you may remember back when you were first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, that this is not life-threatening. And that's something that, everyone knows someone who had an aunt or someone who was in a wheelchair when they're in their 40s and died early. And of course, we all think like that. As healthcare professionals, physicians, nurses, we're trained to think about the worst case scenario. And that's how we all think. And so MS, especially these days, is no longer a worst case scenario. So that's job one. Next job is to educate. And so education, and I've done a little bit here to help educate as well. So for example, there are two processes involved in multiple sclerosis. There's inflammation and there's neurodegeneration. And so that's a simple concept to say, oh, there's two processes going on. Inflammation, that's what causes the relapses that the majority of people with multiple sclerosis experiences. That, that the immune system gets carried away. We suppress inflammation with disease-modifying therapies. We're going to talk about that. The other one, and this is where I put a lot of time on education, is to slow the neurodegeneration that occurs. And so all of our brains are shrinking from the age of 18 on. Bad news for all of us. The brain keeps shrinking. And in MS, that brain shrinkage, the neurodegeneration, is accelerated. And what can we do to slow that down? That's all the stuff that we all know we're supposed to be doing. Getting our exercise, getting good sleep, minimizing stress, proper diet, like a Mediterranean diet, for example. And then all those medical conditions that we're supposed to be taking care of, like addressing high blood pressure, not having high cholesterol, controlling our blood sugars. And for God's sake, stop smoking if you smoke. That's all I'm going to say about that. So basically, lifestyle modifications. So that's part of the education piece. So I mentioned disease-modifying therapy. With your neurologist, if you've got relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, you're going to have a discussion about starting disease-modifying therapy. Some of you are probably going to remember, and I know some of you do because I see you there. Remember the injectables, the once a day or every other day or once a week injectable medications. We no longer really have a lot of those that we use. They're still available. These days, we do antibodies. And so demonstrated here on the left is an antibody bound to its target cell. And these are very effective therapies with a minimum amount of side effects. And so these are available. And the questions that we go through with you are going to be why? Why do we want you to start disease modifying therapy? What options are available to you? And what to expect when you're on disease modifying therapy? What potential side effects are you going to experience? What does the future look like? And the next step, and once you get started on disease modifying therapy, we're no longer looking at relapses. The inflammation has occurred, relapses have happened, and there's a symptom. Sometimes it goes away. If it doesn't completely resolve, then we have to manage the symptoms. And so what do we do? And for example, I put up a figure that I often use here, which is this cycle. It's a vicious cycle of pain, depression, impaired sleep, and fatigue. If you have one of these, you can easily develop one of the others. And if you have pain and depression, they're going to impact upon fatigue. And you can see they're all interconnected. So as a neurologist, I take a look at this picture. We have a conversation. I understand what's going on. And I just pick a spot to intervene. That's what I should personally get the most job satisfaction for me is like helping my patients work through the symptoms to improve quality of life. Okay, we don't have to worry about relapses anymore, and you're doing what you can for neurodegeneration. But what can we do to make life easier day to day? And of course, the symptoms involve motor, there's sensory, there's coordination, like difficulty coordinating movements. There's vision, blurred vision, double vision, bowel, bladder dysfunction. Fatigue is a big one. About 90% of people with MS will experience fatigue. Cognitive problems, mood problems, vertigo, which can be not that common, but when it's there, it's a real pain. It's a hassle. Impaired balance, things like falls and gait difficulty. So these are all the things that, and that's just kind of scratching the surface of symptoms. These are the things that, impact upon day-to-day function, our enjoyment of life, and that we want to address those. And then we monitor for disease activity. So we put you on disease modifying therapy, and the expectation is you're not going to have any more relapses. But what if you do and you don't detect it, or else you do detect, you come in, you tell us that things are going on. So how do we monitor? What we're doing is we're using the expanded disability status scale. This was developed, pieces of it were developed back in the 1950s and has been in widespread use in the 1980s. And anyone who's involved in multiple sclerosis, this is kind of the language that we use, the EDSS, to convey severity of multiple sclerosis. And we assign a score based on 8 kind of major categories of disability that you can see pictured here, which major categories of symptoms. And based on how many symptoms you do or do not have, or findings, things that we see on your neurological examination, we come up with a score for each of these 8 categories, and you get that as your kind of EDSS score. And the scale runs from a 0 up to 10, and 0 is no impairment at all. 1 is, you can see from the figure here, you can still run. 3 is you're walking. When you get up to about a 5, you're using a cane, and by about 7 and above, you're mostly in a wheelchair or using bilateral walking sticks. And at 9, you're bedbound. So that's the kind of the just broadly the score that we're looking at assigning. And so also monitoring disease activity is, your neurologist will order an MRI, look at the MRI, go through the MRI with you. And we order blood work. And like I said, and I mentioned to you, you can expect to get more blood work in the future as we use more blood biomarkers to monitor disease activity as well, and other. So there really isn't any online any good pictures of a doctor who doesn't look like he's just trying way too hard. Like, I certainly don't wear a white coat and a tie. I'm not going to put a slide of some doctor wearing a white coat and a tie to represent myself. But so coming in, talking with your doctor, what else do we do? Well, there's a lot of other things. Filling out forms is like my least favorite thing, but a lot of times, just someone to talk to. Like, MS sucks, and sometimes I recognize, and I think we all do, that you can't. You just need someone to talk to, and maybe you can't always talk to family or friends. Maybe you think they don't want to hear about it, or you don't want to be a burden. Not that you would be. Look, so I like to just to talk with people sometimes. It's good for both of us. You know me, I know you, and that's the role that a neurologist gets to play in multiple sclerosis. And I think I have like a few minutes for questions here.
What are the biomarkers in blood tests that you're?
One of the big ones is going to be neurofilament light chains. It's a marker of neurodegeneration, so we'll know whether we're seeing if we arrested disease activity by keeping the neurofilament light chain levels down.
Is there other types of pain besides neurological pain for MS? My body hurts and trying to figure things out.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot depending on what type of MS you've had and the relapses. There's spasticity, for example. That's that kind of deep achy pain that you get in the muscles of the legs. You can get musculoskeletal pain. So, if you've got decreased activity levels, you're not moving around, maybe more sitting. You develop, the lower back pain. You can develop, once you're sitting down and the muscles aren't moving around that much, more joint pains. There's a trigeminal neuralgia. There's the pains called Lhermitte's phenomenon. So trigeminal neuralgia is kind of sharp stabbing pains across the face. Lhermitte's phenomenon, when you flex your neck, you're going to get a radiating pain that goes down the back. And then sometimes there are pains, and unfortunately, sometimes when you go to see your doctor or go to emergency with a type of pain, they may say, well, you've got multiple sclerosis, and misattribute your pain to multiple sclerosis pain. So sometimes it comes down to kind of advocating for yourself, saying, well, I don't think this sounds like, neuropathic pain or spasticity, which are the two main types of pain, and kind of encouraging people to look a little bit deeper than simply saying this is multiple sclerosis.
Is if your neuro isn't looking for this kind of thing, how do you ask without saying like Dr. Google told me, and then you put in the clarification I was looking for, meaning neurofilament light chains or biomarkers? They are currently just becoming available here in Alberta. So we are in the midst of starting to pilot it. One is we want to make sure that the tests we are using are accurate. And since they haven't been fully validated in Alberta yet, we're working on that. And two is sometimes we don't always know what changes in those biomarkers mean. So We are doing it through a QI project where our samples are being sent to Toronto, University of Alberta. We're collaborating with them, and they're doing it where they're sending it through a program called Mitogen. So we are in the midst of trying to get it done. It's not ready for prime time yet in Alberta, although it's something that we want to be able to use because it is something that's being used in other clinics. We're just getting it started here so that we can use it to monitor for disease activity. So, great question. That's probably why it hasn't been done for you yet, is because we're in Alberta itself. We're not quite ready for prime time. So, for Dr. Jarvis, does everyone diagnosed with MS need a spinal tap test done? And if we haven't, should we?
There's some people that would say we need to do more CSF analysis. Sometimes the diagnosis is so obvious based on clinical presentation and MRI that we don't need to do the spinal tap to analyze cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid analysis can be very helpful if we're not completely convinced we're dealing with multiple sclerosis, if we're looking for one of the mimics, for example. So that's the primary use there. And going down the road, CSF analysis may also become more important for monitoring disease activity as well. If you really want one, I know a lot of residents who would love the opportunity to practice. So let me know.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Jarvis, for a quick overview. You only had 10 minutes, so it was very quick, but much appreciated overview of what we as the neurologists do in the group. Our next guest is the nurse in our clinic, Katrina Vasquez. She has been a nurse with the MS Clinic since the South Health Campus MS Clinic opened in 2012. So for those of you who are not aware, we have one clinic, two locations, or one clinic, two sites, one at Foothills Medical Center and one at South Health Medical Center, and South Health Campus, and it opened in 2012. So Katrina's been with us since that time. She's an MS certified nurse, and she previously worked in the neurorehabilitation program at FMC. So she certainly has a lot of experience working with people with neurological disabilities. So I'm going to pass it over to her and let her talk about the nurse's role in the MS Clinic. So Katrina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Good evening. My name is Katrina. I'm one of the nurses at the MS Clinic South Health Campus site, and I'm here to share the role of the nurses and the allied health team in the MS Clinic. A big part of our role in the MS Clinic is patient education to really help them understand their MS. And so when we meet with our patients for a new diagnosis teaching, we would give information about the clinic, explain the follow-up process, give them our phone numbers, and just the resources available to them. For example, we would explain what a relapse is, common symptoms to watch out for, how to keep track of them, and when to contact the clinic. That initial assessment can be quite overwhelming, and so we wanted to be there and help them feel comfortable that they can reach out to the MS Clinic if they needed any help or advice. Next is symptom management, and so managing MS symptoms can be challenging, and nurses help assess and manage common symptoms such as fatigue, pain, spasticity, bladder and bowel difficulties, just like what Dr. Jarvis has mentioned. And we help educate our patients in practical ways on how to manage these symptoms. So it could be promoting rest or stretching exercises, tips for managing their pain. We also help educate them on different medications that are prescribed by their doctor to help manage these symptoms. And next, we have disease-modifying therapy. So that's an important role for us, is providing information on DMTs. When starting a DMT, there's often a lot of information to take in. So we would sit down, explain the purpose of these medications, how it's given, common side effects and how to manage them. We would send them home with some information handouts so they can review it at home. And we really want to make sure that they understand and feel comfortable in making a treatment choice. And once they make a decision on therapy, we would follow along and provide them guidance on getting started on the medication, from getting lab work done, checking the results, assisting them with getting coverage, for example, letting them know important questions to ask their insurance provider or how to apply for public coverage if needed. And we're just really here to guide them through the whole process of starting their therapy. Next is telephone support. And so nurses are often the first points of contact in the clinic. We provide a lot of nursing care and support over the phone. We typically get phone calls about symptoms, questions about medications, and really just asking for advice on day-to-day challenges. And so we would assess their symptoms over the phone, help them determine if they're having a relapse. We would assess the severity of their symptoms and help them decide on what to do next, whether their symptoms can be safely managed at home, or if we need to arrange a sooner appointment with their neurologist. We can also help them advise if they need to see their family doctor for other health concerns, or if they need to seek urgent medical attention. And so based on their concerns, we can also offer a referral to our allied health team if needed. And we would always communicate their concerns with the neurologists. We would call them back if there is any further advice. What we often hear our patients say is that sometimes it is difficult to say if their symptoms are MS related or not. And so what we tell them is that do not hesitate to give us a call if you have any questions or unsure about something. We're here to help you out. So it's also our role to collaborate with family members and a variety of healthcare professionals to provide comprehensive care to our patients. So we would connect with family physicians, home care, and continuing care. We are in contact with the drug support programs to facilitate starting MS therapy, from getting coverage, financial assistance, for example. If there is a problem with drug coverage or if there is any delay in starting MS therapy, we would follow up with them and we would find solutions. The clinic also collaborate with different specialties. We are physiatrists, urology, and psychiatry, among other specialists. And we also coordinate a lot with our allied health team, which I can discuss a little bit more about later. So as nurses, something that is important and I feel that's meaningful to me is providing emotional support to our patients. So in the clinic or on the phone, our role is to listen and validate the concerns, offer reassurance. We want to make sure that you are supported. We can connect them with counseling services. So that might mean a referral to social work or psychology. We can also provide support for the family members involved in their care so they can help better understand how to help and support their loved ones at home. Next is ongoing surveillance and support of our MS patients. And so when we discuss their symptoms over the phone, our role is to ask more questions and help monitor their response to their treatment, checking for new symptoms, signs of progression or any disease activity. And we want to make sure that we communicate these changes to their neurologist in a timely manner. For those who are on disease-modifying therapies, we help keep them on track, arranging follow-up lab work, for example, assisting in renewing their insurance paperwork, working with drug support programs, filling prescriptions, and things like that, depending on their specific treatments. And we're just here and available to answer any questions about their day-to-day issues with their DMTs, whether they're dealing with a new side effect. We're just here to provide some tips so they can manage and stay on their medication. As for advocacy, we help advocate in many ways. First, making sure that their concerns are addressed. If they have additional questions, for example, after their clinic appointment, or it could be assisting with insurance paperwork or letters of support for work. It could be disability forms, requests for financial support, for medications, or any equipment needs. So in addition, I'll just briefly talk about the role of the rehabilitation nurse, also known as the bladder and bowel nurse, which is also my role in the clinic. And so bladder and bowel symptoms are common, and the job of the rehab nurse is to do assessment of the bladder and bowel, which includes a detailed history of your bladder and bowel habits, doing an ultrasound of the bladder to check if it empties well. Based on the assessment, I provide recommendations on management. So it could be lifestyle modifications, bladder training, management of constipation. It could be bowel routine, review bladder and bowel medications. And for some, we can also teach how to use a catheter, set them up with supplies or continence products if needed. Again, we would coordinate with their family doctor or home care providers. For example, if they needed bowel management help at home or with their catheterization. We also consult our physiatrist or refer to urology if needed for further management of these issues. And so sexual dysfunction is often a topic that's not usually discussed. And so the rehab nurse also can provide strategies and explore some management options, or simply just to open up the conversation so they feel comfortable bringing up their concerns. Last but not the least, we do have our allied health team. They offer a range of services, and this is just a brief overview of their role in the MS clinic. And so first we have our physiotherapists. They would assess walking, strength, balance, and coordination. They do help with strategies to prevent falls, home exercise program. They could also assess for orthotics or equipment needs. And next we have the occupational therapists or our OTs. They help with performing daily tasks and recommend adaptive aids and equipment if needed. They assess for upper extremity function. They do manage fatigue and teach energy conservation measures. They can also help with assessments with work accommodations. And our social worker can assist with counseling, community resources, navigating finances, illness adjustment. If needed, we also have psychologists who can help with counseling, assess for depression or anxiety, or help cope with grief or anger or stress. Part of our team as well is a speech and language pathologist, or SLPs. They assess and treat problems with speech and swallowing. And in addition to that, they can also provide help with memory and word finding difficulties. And we also have an access to a registered dietitian. They review balanced diet, workout, a nutrition plan, and review dietary needs. And we also have a neuropsychologist. They do detailed assessments of cognition, recommend strategies on how to manage day-to-day cognitive challenges. And so really, at the end of the day, our goal as nurses is to be a guide and support for our patients and let them know that they can always reach out if they need any help. And so I hope this presentation helped better understand the role of the nurses and the allied health team within the MS clinic. And so that's all I have, and thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Katrina. That was such a great overview of so many different services that we offer, not just our amazing nurses, but our amazing allied health. So great job compressing it into such a short amount of time. So are there any questions for Katrina? The allied health team, do they charge fees as other similar professionals?
And so we have a allied health team within the MS clinic. And once we send a referral to our allied health team within the clinic, it is free of charge. And so that is part of your care here within the South Health Campus MS.
And that is true at the Foothills Clinic as well. Is the allied health team the same as the Optimus program?
There are similarities, of course, with the team members between the Optimus and the allied health team in the MS clinic, but basically they offer the same services. Dr. Morrow can clarify, I believe the dietitian we have available here at the South Health Campus, but not at the Optimus program.
Correct. The dietitian we have, although she's not part of Optimus, will do assessments of patients from Foothills Hospital. It's a matter of the way the programs were set up. Optimus was created by Dr. Luann Metz as trying to create this comprehensive care for MS. And unfortunately, that model could not be replicated at South Health Campus when the clinic was being established there. Very long, complicated story, but it's two separate unions, two different admins. It's different levels of bureaucracy at both. And so it just couldn't happen. Having said that, the idea is to have the same services available at both sites. It just means it won't be the same physiotherapist, for example. There'll be one who works at Foothills and one who works at South Health. The only one that really crosses between the two is the dietitian currently. Do you have any patient sessions to learn what stretching and exercises we should be doing?
And so typically we would give them some information. There are some information online. It's called Everybody Stretch, where we would also refer to our physiotherapists, and that way they can assess. And of course, everyone will be different. And that way they can tailor more the stretching exercises based on, your limitations, for example. So physiotherapists could help out with that.
And can PPMS patients, so primary progressive MS patients, benefit from physio?
All our patients could benefit with a physiotherapist, and so we start with an assessment, and our physiotherapists are great in assessing, what needs there is, and they get back to our neurologists as well if they needed, say, for example, orthotics or things like that. They do coordinate, and in that way they're in the same page with the recommendations for that.
Do nurses have prescribing authorization for refills and et cetera?
So currently, the nurses do not have prescribing rights, although we are working towards it. So currently, no, but we would coordinate with your physicians if you needed any refills, and make sure that you get your refills on time. But yes, that is hopefully in the works.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, though, that will not apply for disease-modifying therapies. Even certain physicians or neurologists cannot prescribe disease-modifying therapies. Those can only be those neurologists with an MS specialty designation. So we're hoping our nursing colleagues will be able to help out, although they already do so much, with some refills that perhaps aren't as specialized, but hopefully we'll still be able to coordinate that going forward. Our next two talks, we've had two clinical talks about what we offer in the MS clinic. Now we're going to move on to more research focused. I really do feel that one of the bedrock or the foundations of an academic MS clinic is being able to offer our patients not just excellent clinical care, but also the ability to participate in cutting edge research. Calgary really has a fantastic MS research program, both basic science and clinical work. So we're going to touch on a little bit of both of those today. So our first guest is going to be Dr. Shalina Ousman. She's going to do the basic science part of the talk. So she is a professor in the Department of Clinical Neurosciences and in Cell Biology and Anatomy at the Hotchkiss Brain Institute here at the University of Calgary. Her main interest is in identifying endogenous protective mechanisms in multiple sclerosis. And for those who don't know what the word endogenous means, it means things that are within your own body. So endogenous as opposed to exogenous or outside the body. So her research is currently funded by CHR and MS Canada. So Dr. Ousman is going to talk about her research, but also a little bit of flavor of some of the other research going on in our group. So welcome, Shalina.
Thank you. So thank you, Sarah, and for this invitation to be here. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm always excited to talk about research. So before I talk about my own research and how it actually overlaps with other researchers here, I just want to give you a flavor of what the range of research that occurs in Calgary. So for example, our own Dr. Sarah Morrow studies MS and cognition. Dr. Yunyan Zhang is an imager, and she looks at the development and application of imaging and data methods for MS. So for the context of helping with diagnosis and also in clinical trials and in analyzing MRIs as to whether there's improvement in the brain. Dr. Peter Stice, maybe some of you have heard him speak before, has a really unique idea in trying to understand if misfolded proteins drive progression in MS. Some of you have probably definitely heard from Dr. Wee Young, who's interested in repair and recovery of functions in MS. And in my lab, as I'll talk about, as Sarah mentioned, protective mechanisms, but we're now going into the realm of aging mechanisms contributing to progression in multiple sclerosis. And you're probably going to hear from Carlos that we're also doing research on biomarkers and moving these discoveries into the clinic, so translational research. So in terms of what my lab is interested in, we're interested in protective mechanisms in MS. And basically, what we're trying to understand is whenever your body encounters, for example, a cut or a bruise, there's a natural mechanism that comes into play to heal those cuts and bruises. And that likely happens with every disease there is, including MS. And so the idea is, what are these repair mechanisms, and can we shift the balance from injury to repair? And in order to assess that, we have a number of questions we ask. So first of all, are there natural repair mechanisms and molecules in MS? And if they are, why are they unable to suppress the injurious responses? Are they inhibited in some way? Are they defective in some way? And if we can understand that, then maybe we can harness their protective functions to overcome the negative mechanisms. And my lab, including others here at the Hotchkiss Brain Institute and the MS program, we try to answer various questions using different assays. We have models of multiple sclerosis, and we can then use the immune cells and the nervous system cells from those models to be able to ask intricate questions. Amazingly, and this was one of the reasons I came to Calgary, there's a really nice connection, interaction between the lab scientists and the clinical research scientists. And so we're able to create projects where we can also use human samples. And so if any of you have ever contributed to our human blood sample projects, thank you very much. They've been amazing to help. So we were able to do some experiments with MS blood samples. And we're also been able to do some experiments with post-mortem brain samples from MS brain banks, such as the UK Brain Bank. And so all these various ways of studying the disease enables us to have a more holistic understanding of what might be going on at the cellular and tissue level. So a little bit about the different projects in my lab and how I'm not the only one where some of these projects come into play. So for example, we ended up starting to do studies on sex difference in multiple sclerosis. So as many of you, because you probably read a lot on the literature, MS, like most autoimmune diseases, has a very distinct sex difference. So more women develop MS compared to men. And a few years ago, we discovered that a gene that is highly increased in the brains of MS patients actually seems to play a role in the sex difference, where it's a detrimental, it's a bad molecule in females. And so we're trying to understand why that happens. But I'm just to try to move that beyond my lab. The funding agencies have been very proactive in telling lab scientists and the clinical scientists that you have to include sexes and genders in your study. And so not only my lab, but many other labs now are finding that there are sex differences in different assays that they're looking at. So this has been quite exciting because it might be able to explain why there's a difference between females and males in MS. Another side of the coin that we're looking at is the protection, in this case, remyelination in multiple sclerosis. Many years ago, we were trying to understand what the role is of a gene that's the most increased in the brains of people with MS. This was a molecule called alpha-B-crystalline. And we did many experiments showing that it actually plays a protective role. But in patients, interestingly, the body tends to produce antibodies. So these are molecules that will attack a protein. And so the question is, why would your own body generate these antibodies to attack a protective molecule? But we were able to show that if you give more of this molecule, it becomes protective again. And colleagues in the Netherlands have moved this into clinical trials and phase 2 trials, showing that it was beneficial in MS patients by reducing number of lesions. We're very excited that we were able to obtain the MRIs from that study. And we're actually working with Dr. Yunyan Zhang to understand whether this CRIAB is able to promote remyelination in multiple sclerosis. The third area of research in the lab is looking at progressive MS. So patients, family members, funding agencies have told us, the scientists, that you've done an okay job at getting DMT, disease-modifying therapies for relapsed and remitting MS, but they only work for certain groups of people, and for the most part, people are still progressing. So you have to try and understand what's happening in progressive MS. So my lab has decided to throw our hat into the ring on this. The way we're trying to address it is we've noticed from the literature that of everything that has looked at regarding progressive MS, the only thing that has the highest correlation so far is aging. So regardless of when you were diagnosed with your MS in the 20s, 30s, or 40s, most people tend to progress around the age of 50. And so from that observation, we thought that the hypothesis we have is that maybe mechanisms of aging sort of tip you over the tipping point to progression. And so we're now trying to understand how might mechanisms of aging contribute to progression in MS. One of the mechanisms we're assessing right now is the gut. Let's see if this shows up. Is the gut microbiota. We have a model where animals get a progressive or a non-progressive disease, and really amazingly, their gut microbiota is different. And if you give those different microbiota, you get that kind of disease stage. So we're working with Dr. Kathy McCoy here at Calgary to understand how does the gut microbiota, how can different gut microbiota lead to a progressive or non-progressive disease? And finally, the last mechanism of aging that we're looking at is autophagy. This is a mechanism in cells that normally keeps your cells happy and healthy and not to die off. But we noticed in blood cells from patients that the level of these markers are different whether you're a relapsed or remitting disease or you have progressive disease. And so we're trying to understand what would a different level mean in terms of the function of cells. And this is a collaboration with one of the MS Clinic neurologist, Dr. Jody Burton. But I just want to end off that that I'm not the only one working on progressive MS here at Calgary. Many others are, and they're looking at it from slightly different angles in protection of nerve cells and remyelination. And so I find it's a very exciting time because we can collaborate with each other and learn from each other to try and really understand not just relapsed or remitting MS, but progressive MS. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for such a great overview. Brain has plasticity. Can nervous system follow?
Yes, so, and it actually ties in with some of the clinical work that you heard from before and some of the questions. So I'm aging, and I tell you, I'm terrified because you know, everything changes with aging. So I've read every data, so you know, I'm data-driven research that have shown what can help degeneration with age. And honestly, it's just like Scott said earlier, sort of those common sense things you've heard before, you know, healthy eating, sleeping well, exercise, a bit of calorie restriction. All of these have data that really are impressive in protecting brain tissue and a healthier aging. And some of those data also are shown for diseases, not just natural aging. Yes.
For women, does menopause or perimenopause correlate with development of progressive MS?
So yes, there's a little bit of data on this that the hormonal change, there's an association with that change in progressive MS. No one has really done a really good study on following up on it, but yes, there definitely is a correlation with that. Yes.
Is there a way for a patient that a patient could speak with the researchers, people like Dr. Ousman, to learn more?
I will put up my email again at the end of this session. Can always reach out to me, and we do have a couple of different programs that are going on where we connect people living with MS and our researchers as much as we can. But if you have specific questions, you can always reach out to me, and I'll find the correct researcher or to answer your question.
How can we make sure our MS brains get donated for MS research? There actually is a brain repository that we have. So if you reach out to Trisha, we can get you connected to that consent with one of our pathologists. It is something that he has asked me to advertise through the MS Clinic. So it's something that we do want to share with our patients if it's something that they would want to do at the end of their lives. It's just one of the things on the list of my things to do. So I haven't necessarily got organized to send it out to our patients. But yes, we do have that available. And if you email Trisha, I can get her to send you that contact information. And thank you so much for always thinking about research and how you can advance research for other people with MS, because obviously that is at the end of life the time when you're benefiting others the most. So thank you so much. So last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Camara. He is an MS neurologist and researcher who moved to Calgary from Mexico in 2017, specifically to pursue an academic medicine career in the field. So when he first came, he was hoping to go back to Mexico, but we are really happy and excited that he chose to stay with us and share his expertise and his research with us. So his main area of interest is translation of research, so that basic science that Dr. Ousman was talking about, and bringing it into clinical practice. So Dr. Camara, welcome.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about clinical trials, which I think are amazing. I am biased because I do clinical trials, and at the end of the day, we are all scientists, even though we're physicians. We use the scientific method when we think of how to treat people, right? So yeah, so basically, you know, importance of clinical trials. I highlight there what I think is the ultimate point, right? It has to improve care of people living with MS. If not, then, you know, I don't know. Why would someone be doing a clinical trial just for the sake of, like, fundamental interest, right? We're not astronomers finding a new star that we'll never get to, right? We're scientists and the health scientists, and we should focus on health. Of course, there's also the importance of advancing knowledge. We do want to know more about the disease, but we want to know more so that we can treat it better, right? Of course, we, again, as physicians, we also want evidence-based recommendations. Like, there were a bunch of very good questions there in the chat, many of which have no clear evidence-based answer, right? What is the best diet? It's a tough one. There's 50 diets out there. There's 100 diets out there. There's books for every single diet, and there's people who build their empire selling their books, and they're which one is better? Well, the only way we would know if somebody actually took the time to do a clinical trial where they compare diets in a randomized way in different populations, but that's not gonna be it's not gonna be done. So so again, we need that evidence-based recommendations. That's the importance of clinical trials. And of course, just giving back and building community, right? So again, we do these things for a purpose. The purpose is patient care, and then it gets a little bit complicated because clinical trials. So sure, we have pharma, right? I mean, they do most clinical trials, most phase 3 clinical trials that lead to the approval of a new drug. There's no question about that. Then there's academic medicine, which I see it as this bridge where we get to do some things a little bit different. Maybe we don't have the pressures of stakeholders or stock market or whatnot. We're just focusing on ideas that we think are good and can help people, right? And then there's basic science, which is extremely important, but also very, very hard, right? Because then how do you come from the looking at little cells and little mice with disease and then taking it to humans? I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's where I see academic research certainly as this bridge that we all need in the field. So again, I see clinical trials as this never-ending loop of we get basic research from one side, we have academic medicine and then we try our best to take every insight that we can get into patient care. So this is just one of the issues that I see with traditional clinical trials, and it's here on the top. So this is the traditional way of looking at clinical trials, how they come to be. So here on the left, you see basic scientists finding these molecules. Like, is it a type of white blood cell? Is it this molecule, something that we can target? And we start doing these little experiments, very well, not little, very complicated experiments to see what they do to cells and to little mouse models and see if they could help. By then, we're like 10 years into research, several $1 million into research. Then we have to do phase 1 trials where if we develop this drug, we want to make sure it's safe. Then phase 2, that it's tolerable and has some efficacy. That could take another few years. Phase 3 trials are the big industry-sponsored studies where they divide hundreds of people into different groups. We almost don't do placebos anymore, but in the old days, placebo versus a drug, right? These studies cost several dozen $1 million to do, with the hope that it's a positive study and eventually this can lead into the clinic. But it can take 12 years, it can take 15 years from the beginning of somebody having an insight to therapy. So the issue there, of course, is that people don't have 12 years, right? We answer to patients, and patients are there asking us, what can I do now? There were a couple of questions there in the chat about that. So we need to speed it up, and that's investigator-initiated trials. These are clinical trials coming from academic researchers. So sometimes we can skip some steps safely, right? We still want to be safe. We're not skipping things, sacrificing safety, but what if we find new ways of using old medications? What if we find new ways of answering questions that don't take decades or phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials? This is just an example of one of the approaches that sometimes we can take, and history of medicine is full of things like that, right? So aspirin was not invented to prevent heart attacks. It was just found in a bark of a tree, and it helped with pain. And they started noticing, oh, by the way, people have less heart attack when they take aspirin. And so quick, easy way of finding a new application, like repurposing an established existing medication, something that very hard to do in the traditional way of conceiving of clinical research. But anyhow, another very important thing of clinical research is patient-oriented research, right? So again, I saw some questions there of the question of how do I get in touch with researchers to learn more. Well, we also want to learn more about you guys, right? About patients. So we need to engage people living with the disease as partners in research, not just as subjects of research. We have to focus on patient-identified priorities. I mean, there are common sense things. We all want a cure, right? We all want remyelination, yes. But you may be in a room full of people and we're telling them about these amazing plans of curing the disease 10, 20, 30 years from now. But people will start saying, wait, what about my pain right now? What about my cognition right now? What about my fatigue right now? How do I treat that? And I have to say, there's no phase 3 trials about it. Nobody has done a phase 3 study to help with any of these things, really, right? So this is because we haven't been listening. So we need to know what to research by knowing what is important for people. And again, the issue with doing a study on fatigue and say exercise is that the potential for um, selling exercise is not it's not there. There's no incentive to invest $20 million in a phase 3 trial with exercise, right? And finally, just to apply knowledge and improve care, right? So some examples, right? So again, so Dr. Morrow, who very kindly introduced us and is moderating, she's working towards a very cool study at looking at that THC and CBD. I mean, it just makes sense, right? I mean, it's all over the internet, all over the news, all over the published scientific literature. What does cannabis do? Lots of people are using it already, but there's no phase 3 trials. Nobody really knows what, how, when, and is it safe in the terms of cognition, can be used for pain, for spasticity. So these type of research is the type of research that we can do in academic medicine, right? We have to answer very practical, important questions for people, but pharma is not going to fund it, right? You can get cannabis in any store right now. There's no patent as far as I know. And there's another study that maybe many of you may be already participating in it, and this is Dr. Roberts, one of our amazing new junior scientists, who is following people over many years. We all looked at their data, and we can ask questions, and we can only do this when people pay and participants and partners say yes. I provide consent for my research to be looked at, for my clinical data to be looked at, and we've been able to answer a bunch of amazing questions, like things like, how can we screen for depression? Are there challenges? And there's published data many years ago using this data set. Also, how do people with MS progress? There were some questions there about what secondary progressive disease is and what PIRA is, and we can look at people's data and actually try to come up with answers. Finally, also the role of intestinal microbiome, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. I am doing one of these clinical trials trying to find a new treatment for primary progressive MS. We're recruiting people right now, just as an example. But anyway, and I haven't mentioned everyone who is involved, but there's a bunch of other ongoing clinical trials. And just a little bit of history here in our clinic. So Dr. Morrow mentioned Dr. Matz, who took an idea over many years finally to a phase 3 study that was published in the most important scientific journal in the world, showing that minocycline was a potential therapy for early MS. So there's been some success in taking these leaps and these risks. Also, Dr. Koch, who's very active in clinical trials, both in innovating in how to do trials themselves, and he also published a paper of a potential treatment for primary progressive MS that I think is being developed towards other phase 2, phase 3 trials in Europe. Very early though, so who knows? And in the clinic, we also do pharma research, and again, this is it's extremely important, right? Right now, there are options out there that could make a difference. There's one study currently recruiting where we are looking at non-relapsing secondary progressive MS, which I think there was a question about that too in the chat. This is a drug that showed some promise to reduce inflammation in early phase studies and in relapsing remitting MS, and it's being tried in secondary progressive MS, right? There's also this is just a couple of examples, and there's another example of Ocrevus, a very good drug used for relapsing remitting MS, who is about to lose its patent. So companies are already trying to find the biosimilar that could reduce potentially costs and improve access to this drug here and many other places, which is a very valuable thing, right? So lots of pieces of places where I think clinical trial work is very active here in our center and could not be done without the help of participants. There's many others. We have researchers here in our center who are looking at the role of hypoxia. There's people who are looking at the role of Epstein-Barr virus, the effects of menarche in MS, so again, hormonal changes, even new tools to how to monitor progression and so on and so forth. So we are very excited about that. You can participate in that sim study that I mentioned, but with Dr. Roberts as a lead, where we're just capturing people's data if they agree to in a safe way, where we don't divulge any sensitive identifying information. And we also would like anyone who's interested to join our research contact list, where we're able to then contact people for opportunities in terms of existing clinical trials or even other types of research activity. It's a team effort, and the only way we're going to get anywhere is by working together.
Excellent. I always get excited when you talk about clinical research, probably because it's part of my interest too. Is so exciting to see some of the things that are coming out of the lab and into the actual clinic space. So thanks so much for sharing that. Questions for Dr. Camara. Isn't all progressive MS not relapsing and remitting, Dr. Camara?
In a way, yeah. I mean, so first of all, there is a movement in the field towards eliminating the categories that we know today, but I'm getting ahead of myself, right? But I guess you could say so that you can't have, yeah, you can't have both at the same time, but you can have secondary progressive disease with inflammatory activity and with relapses and with remission, which again, it sounds weird. Or you could have relapsing remitting MS with aspects of progression. That in the chat there were some talks about something called PIRA. But formally speaking, as of today, if you are diagnosed with one category versus the other, they're exclusionary for example, for clinical trials. You would go into a different clinical trial depending on what category you were given.
For those of us not in Alberta, how do we find out about clinical trials in our area of the country?
Excellent question. The first way to the first place I would go to is to the MS Society of Canada, which may have some information, but then go to your neurologist and to your local MS clinic, or where they should have at least a list of potential trials recruiting in their center.
Was someone asking about CNM AU8. I don't know how to say that. So that is still in very, very early trials. It is looking at neurodegenerative disease. It's currently not something that we are experimenting with here in Calgary. I actually don't think there's any sites in Canada at all. It's still very early, like it's not even at the human phase yet for MS. But certainly that's part of what Dr. Kamara is talking about, is that idea of bringing things from the lab into the clinic. So, is there a relationship between apnea and I think you mean hypoxia and MS, Dr. Kamara? I keep saying
So there's a thought that the MS brain is a little bit more susceptible to hypoxia. So exactly how or what type of role it plays, we don't know. We assume it's bad, but we are very early on research on that. And I assume, so if there was a question on sleep apnea, well, that would be bad. I mean, sleep apnea is related to fatigue, is related to cognitive dysfunction. And so on top of that, if someone with MS also has sleep apnea, things would not look nice.
Is anything coming to the clinic about microbiome?
Another very tough area of doing actual phase 3 studies. Very, very, very difficult. I mean, right now there are places around the world that offer fecal transplantation, but more likely than not, it's people taking advantage of people's despair and just charging, I don't know, 10 grand, 20 grand. There probably is something there, but it's just too early. And to actually do a phase 3 study with microbes, imagine that you would have to control for diet, what type of microbe, how often you give that microbe, what type of population, and who is going to invest 20, 30 million dollars in something like that. It's so not anytime soon, but it's a field that is moving extremely rapidly. So and Calgary, in fact, has one of the best microbiome research areas in neurology, but in other fields like autism and other neuropsychiatric diseases, who knows, maybe something will be coming up soon in MS.
Dr. Kamara, is there any new, is there AI, the use of AI in MS research? Yes.
Very hot topic for sure. Yeah, it's part of our lives now, right? So it's gonna make some difference. But if you ask me right now, is there an AI project like immediately looking at medications or trial design or whatnot? Not that I'm aware of, but there's a bunch of AI, for example, in analyzing MRI images, analyzing big data. Like there's registries out there with 100,000 people in the registry. So you need AI to kind of look at the patterns and whatnot. But I don't know that they have AI working like coming up with a new therapy right now. Although this was done during COVID with mixed results, so who knows? I mean, again, the literature is vast. There must be someone out there trying.
So there's one question that I'm going to answer because it speaks to near and dear to my heart is, does symptom drive research? Can you study just one thing, brain fog, numbness, and offer concrete suggestions? So as a clinical researcher, so this is actually what I do is often my patients will tell me about symptoms, or I don't know how to identify it properly, or I don't know how to treat it properly, or I don't know how to quantify it. And that is actually what drives my research. So most of my research is actually on cognitive impairment. You mentioned brain fog, and certainly has led to me doing. I've done 3 different clinical trials of interventions, medication interventions that unfortunately have been negative, and a few non-medication interventions that have been somewhat positive. But it's sometimes hard to go that way. Is that I'm basically taking a symptom that we don't understand the underlying cause, and I'm then trying to piece together how to measure it and then treat it, but I may not be actually getting to the root of the problem because I don't know what causes it. And that's where that, bringing together the basic science and that translation that Dr. Kamara is talking about is really beneficial here in Calgary. Is you can kind of put the two together. You can take it from the bench to the bedside, take it from the lab to the patient, but you can also take it from the patient to the lab. So that's certainly something that we're trying to capitalize on here with our research program in Calgary.
MS is not something that is entirely predictable sometimes. So I wouldn't say no to MS perhaps playing a role in what sounds like it could be spasticity. Ultimately, it would come down to probably a trial of something simple like say magnesium, and then giving a spasmolytic or a medication a shot, which you can certainly discuss with your neurologist.
I've heard of smoldering MS in Britain, but never here. What is it? Oh, it's definitely talked about here too, Emily. Dr. Kamara, do you want to field that one?
Yeah. So it was great. It's a PR thing. So it's a nice word. So you can put it in ads. You can sell it. What does it mean? It means that there's inflammation that we know that we all always have known, relapses, new lesions, whatever. And there's this other type of activity that's going on in the disease that is causing or probably driving neurodegeneration. So worsening, progression. What it is exactly, it kind of varies on the definition. We think it could be immune cells that are inside of the brain and not outside. We think it could be cells in the brain that have immune properties like microglia. It could be what is driving atrophy. So it is a protein a concept, but it's a fancy way of saying this drives neurodegeneration, this drives progression, and we really can't stop it right now very well. But the actual word came probably from like a focus group with a bunch of people coming up with the best term to describe something we've known exists for forever, right? The question about smoldering disease is, can we stop it? The answer is not right now, but there's a lot of people trying.
Okay, I think final question. Are we not at looking for a cure for MS anymore? Or why are we focusing on all the other things? Have we moved away from looking for a cure for MS? So Dr. Ousman, why don't I get you to field that one? Because I can see you shaking your head. And then I think we'll end, this will be our last question.
Yeah, no, actually, I was just writing a comment. It's actually quite the opposite. I mean, for all scientists, the holy grail is finding a cure, and we're all that's what we dedicate our whole lives to. But it's not, not one person can do that. It's so many people come together with different ideas, and we learn from each other, and it'll all that knowledge will come together to, one day it's going to be, oh, right. So quite the opposite. I love coming to work because of this question. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for everyone for coming. And I did see a few of my old Ontario patients present, so it's nice to see your lovely faces. I do miss you guys. But For those of you here in Calgary, one of the reasons I came here is because it is just such a great clinic and great research environment to be a part of. So we're really happy to help you in any way we can, both clinically and from a research perspective. We may not have something perfect for you right now, but we are always trying to strive to better care for our patients, and we appreciate any feedback, both in terms of clinical and research things that we can do better. So if you have any questions or concerns, any topics you'd like us to perhaps address in the future, this is a new series we just initiated. This is only our second one where we're doing these community outreaches for exactly this reason, to engage you guys, who are really the reason we're here, as Dr. Jarvis alluded to before. I mean, we're doing this for you guys. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you in the future. And one final round of applause for our speakers, Scott, Katrina, Shalina, and Carlos. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. We really appreciate it.